everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Penscast. I am your host, Garrett Bahana. As always, alongside me, fellow member of the Pensburg.com writing team and co-host of the Penscast of Fans First Sports Network, it's Robbie Noggle. Robbie, this is the second time we're meeting this week. How have you been since the mailbag earlier in the week?
Not too bad. You just said before we hit record there, it's one day closer to Friday. We're recording this on Thursday, so by the time you'll be listening to this, hopefully you're off work and enjoying the weekend, and hopefully it's nice wherever you are, because I think it's supposed to rain here this weekend, but it sure is nice today. So enjoy it while you can, and thanks for listening.
I have to say, I was out on my back porch last night having a couple of drinks, and it felt more like winter than it did spring. It was windy, it was cold, it started to rain while I was outside. So I took some of the festivities inside my house, which was unfortunate. I wanted to get outside, get some fresh air, but hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll get some nice spring weather. And hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll have a more affirmative answer of where the Penguins and their fortunes lie as they march towards hopefully clinching a Stanley Cup playoff spot. And that's part of the conversation we're going to talk about today. And earlier in the week, the Penguins, they had a really roller coaster-esque game against the Detroit Red Wings in which David Perron and the Red Wings would beat the Penguins by a score of 7-4. It was another game where you look at the Penguins, you look at the Red Wings. The Red Wings aren't going anywhere this year. The Penguins are fighting for their lives to just clinch a wild card spot at this point. Really, Robbie, all three facets of the Penguins game that have haunted them up to this point in the season were on full display. And so that's the discussion we're going to have for this week's episode of the Penscast. We know that this team is deeply flawed. We know that the depth is not ideal. The defense is set up, especially recently due to injuries with AHL players. Goaltending has been unreliable. Tristan Jarry is injured once again. So, Robbie, we look tonight as we record this episode before the Penguins drop the puck against the Nashville Predators. We look, there's 7 games left on the schedule. Looking at the Penguins' record, they're 36, 28, and 10. 4-6 in their last 10. Looking at the wild card standings right now, the Penguins, as I mentioned, are in the second wild card spot, 82 points. The Florida Panthers are on their tail right behind them with 81 points. Pittsburgh has a game in hand on the Panthers. They have 2 games in hand on the Islanders. However, the Islanders do have 87 points. I don't foresee a scenario, a realistic one, at least in my opinion, where the Penguins overtake the Islanders. It would have to be something of a crazy run, and the Islanders would have to have a little mini tailspin there. So realistically for the Penguins, you're looking at trying to solidify this second wild card spot with 7 games remaining. Again, even after the loss against Detroit, the odds ever so slightly took a dip, but the odds are still in their favor to clinch a playoff spot. The question I want to ask you is, which area of this team gives you the most concern as we march towards the conclusion of the regular season? And for this conversation, for the sake of it, we'll say they get into the postseason. Are you more concerned with the unreliable / injury-riddled goaltending, a patchwork defense, or a lackluster bottom 6, or are you concerned enough that you would combine all 3?
Well, I think all 3 of those things there are major concerns. For me personally, if I'm ranking them, at the top right now is the goaltending. It's not good enough. That's as simple as that. It's just not. It's not even playoff worthy. We're talking about Stanley Cup worthy. It's not even playoff worthy goaltending they're getting, and that is discussing both Tristan Jarry and Casey Smith. When you score 4 goals in the game, it should be enough to win the game in the NHL. Okay, maybe a point. You were tied 4-4. You start the slow start again. We've talked about that all season. Not good. But the Detroit's a kind of team, kind of like Columbus, where you kind of battle back and get yourself back into the game. Detroit clearly in the full tank. They had lost 12 out of 15 coming into that game. So that way it wasn't necessarily the worst. It wasn't like you were down against a Boston or a Carolina or even a team like the Rangers at that point. But yeah, goaltending has to be the big concern right now. And the easy way to fix it, there is no easy way to fix it. There's no fix for it at this point. There's nothing you can do to fix it. You just have to hope that one of those guys gets hot. And they've shown, unfortunately, no signs of either of them doing that. And Dustin Tokarski is not going to be the guy to do it either. So there's no simple fix for the goaltending, and that's the biggest issue right now. And it's not good enough at all, and it's highly unfortunate that it's come to this. Jari, injury or not, just hasn't been good enough this year. And a couple of things to point out here: since the trade deadline, the Penguins have outshot their opponents in 10 of 13 games and outscoring chance them in 11 of those 13 games. They won 5 of those 13 games. That's goaltending. That's not. I mean, we can harp on the bottom 6, but that's not just the top line guys doing that. There's bottom 6, despite its flaws, that is doing some of the damage there, and that's just simply goaltending's not good enough. It needs to be better, and unless one of those guys gets on a heater, it ain't going to be better, unfortunately. And they're just going to have to find a way to. They're either going to outscore everybody. They're not going to outscore Boston. They're not going to outscore Carolina in a 7-game series. Yeah, you might get one game where one of the goalies gives up 1 or 2 goals and your offense clicks. You don't have the depth to go goal for goal with teams like that. And if they get in, that's what's going to happen. You're going to get run out in 5 games. If you're lucky, 6. It's just not. There's just no answer for it, and there's no excuse for it. And this kind of goes back again to the bottom 6 issues of leading back to Ron Hextall, where all summer everybody's saying get a backup goalie, and he does nothing. He sits on his laurels, decides that he's going to go in with and I don't blame the Tristan Jarry thing. I don't blame on Ron Hextall. Tristan Jarry had a very good season last year. Unfortunately, he got hurt before that series against the Rangers. And nothing anybody could do about that. But there was clearly other stuff that could be done in the offseason to find another goaltender, a more reliable backup veteran goaltender. Didn't do it. There were opportunities at the deadline, passed on them, and now you're stuck with this. And that's the bed they made, the bed Ron Hextall made, and now he's forcing his team to lie in it. And that is going to be one of the many things that will be his undoing, or his continued undoing, and ultimately, I believe, failure as the Penguins general manager, which will lead to him being fired whenever the Penguins season ends, whether that be at the end of the 7 games or however many playoff games they get. I think that will be the end of the Ron Hextall era in Pittsburgh, and rightfully so. This is all on them, the front office. They just did not. They did not do enough to fix the situation at any point when the issues were there. This isn't just something that just happened in the last 2 weeks. These issues have been glaring all season, and nothing was done. And you can blame Mike Sullivan for a lot of the deployment issues with certain players. He only has 3 goaltenders to work with. If none of them are good, you got to play one of them. You can't play with an open net. Maybe sometimes you feel like they'd almost be better playing with an open net, but it's a situation that Ron Hextall put them in. There's no simple loss. It was glaringly obvious against the Red Wings in a game that they pretty much dominated. After that beginning of the game, for the final 40 minutes, it was all Penguins, but they couldn't get the saves when they needed to. And yeah, we can harp on the bottom 6, and that's a perfectly valid criticism. But right now, goaltending is killing this team. It's just been absolutely devastating to their playoff chances, and anytime they have a chance to kind of build some cushion, it just shoots themselves in the foot, and it's unfortunate. And there's no easy fix for any of their issues, especially goaltending. Nothing's going to just fall to you. It is what it is at this point. You kind of got to just hope that one of these guys can get just hot enough to get them to the playoffs. But I don't foresee an instance where they have the weapons or the depth to outscore a team like Boston or Carolina over the course of a series to advance. So if they get in, it'll be a short first-round series and back to the offseason where hopefully a bevy of changes is in store.
It is frustrating, isn't it? A lot of the conversations we've had really since the season's beginning back in October has revolved around Ron Hextall and the limitations that he put on this team. And I was reading an Athletic article from Josh Yohe earlier this afternoon, and it was largely the article was coming to the defense of Mike Sullivan as the head coach. And Yoey said that Sullivan is not above the criticism because, and you even mentioned it, Robbie, as the deployment issues regarding players like Brian Dumoulin and Jeff Carter. In Sullivan's case, he can only play with the hand that he is dealt. And that's something that we've talked about for several weeks now. And it goes back to part of the frustration I have is that every time we come on to press the record button here, it seems like we're having a different kind of conversation, albeit it's about the same thing. And that same thing always comes back to Ron Hextall and his inability to construct a Stanley Cup contending worthy roster. And there's a quote that I pulled from this Athletic article that I think really hits the nail on the head with regard to Sullivan, who I don't think is in danger of losing his job, especially because when I was reading that article, I got the feeling that Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang are going to stand behind Sullivan no matter what. I firmly believe at this point there might have been a couple of times at some various points throughout this season where I would have thought, I wonder if Sullivan's seat is hot, but after reading what Yoey put out today in The Athletic, I am going to strongly lean towards Mike Sullivan coming back. I don't think he was ever in danger of losing his job anyway, but going back to what Josh Yoey said, let me pull the quote up here. Sullivan is far from perfect, but he's not the problem here. Hextall is the problem. Hands-off ownership is the problem. And an incredibly old roster with no depth is the problem. And really, Robbie, how many podcasts have we recorded this season where we've come here, hit the record button, and talked about a lack of depth, an old roster, Ron Hextall's unfortunate transactions that have put the Penguins in this scenario? It kind of feels like we're treading water at this point, and we're going to be treading water until the offseason, for better or for worse. As unfortunate as that sounds, I mentioned that we come on here and oftentimes we sound like a broken record between the two of us. I mean, what do we know? We're just two guys with a podcast talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins and their shortcomings. However, it's frustrating from a fan's perspective because you want to be invested at this time of the season. You can't be invested. And it's unfortunate, again, because the reputation the Penguins have built over the last 18 years has been perennial Stanley Cup playoff favorite, perennial Stanley Cup contender, and they're just not that. And it's almost like fans now are waiting for the offseason rather than the postseason. The action is going to come in the offseason. It's not going to come in the postseason against the Bruins or the Hurricanes. Like you said, Robbie, 4, 5, 6, if they're lucky, 6 games, and the Penguins are likely out of it unless they go on a magical run, unless they've been conserving their energy up until this point, which they could be. They could be conserving their legs. They are the NHL's oldest team by far. They could be trying to conserve as much energy as possible and just trying to get across the finish line with as little effort as possible. But it's unfortunate that we're at the point where we're waiting for the offseason. We're hopefully waiting for a change in the front office level. Hopefully the hands-off ownership of the Fenway Sports Group will finally step up to the plate. Hopefully a combination of all of these factors brings us together in whether it's late April or early May, whenever the transaction is made. Because you would have to imagine that a new general manager would like to be put in place before the draft I believe the draft is in late June. Free agency starts in early July. So if you're going to make a move regarding a new general manager, you'd like it to be done before the summer season begins. So with that, we're kind of just waiting. We're waiting to see what the future holds for this hockey club, for the 2022-23 Pittsburgh Penguins. It's unfortunate that we're at this point with 7 games left. The Penguins have not clinched a playoff spot. Like I said, it looks like they will. The odds are in their favor unless they collapse, which still may be possible. But we're waiting for the offseason, as unfortunate as that sounds, because if you're a Penguin fan, if you've been a Penguin fan for the last 18 or so years, even during the Lemieux era, when Lemieux and Yager were still playing, you weren't waiting for the offseason. You were waiting for the postseason. The Penguins, some of their fan base had developed a reputation of being fair weather. And while I believe some of that is partially true, some of the fans don't come out until March or April to support the Penguins.
I mean, yeah, it's easy to point to that, but I mean, that's something that you see in every sport.
You're right. You're right.
It's not just, and like, yeah, it sucks to go see a team that's awful. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, that's
what I'm trying to say.
That's just the nature. Like, I mean, I guess I'll use the Pirates as an example. Like, okay, maybe I enjoy, even when they're bad, because I love baseball, I enjoy going to a game or two a year. Okay, well, the Penguins, I love hockey. I enjoy going, if they're bad, I enjoy going to a game or two a year. But during their heyday, like, especially, I think the 2017-18 season, the year they were going for the third cup, I think I went to 10 games. Now, tickets were a little bit cheaper because, like, I think a lot of it was starting to be like, okay, like, this is getting, like, people were just kind of, like, not as necessarily as enthused for that regular season because, again, it all comes down to the playoffs. So, like, I got some really cheap tickets. But, like, yeah, it sucks to go to watch. Like, you don't want to go watch a team, like, the early 2000 Penguins. You're not going to go and watch that team play 10 games a year. Exactly. That's awful. It's horrible hockey. But yeah, I just think, and that goes for every fan base. I think it's just a cop out. Like, fans want their team to win. Like, that's how you get people in seats. So, like, yeah, if they suck, yeah, you're not going to go. Fair weather, every team's fair weather to a point.
That leaves us to what is hopefully for the Penguins' sake, hopefully for Crosby and Malkin and Letang's sake, that leads us to the offseason. And, you know, we're going to come back here next week with even fewer games remaining on the schedule to see if by that point the Penguins have clinched a playoff spot. As unfortunate as it is, like you said, the fans, you and I included, want to see this team successful, especially in the final years of Crosby and Malkin's career. However much longer they have, then, you know, that's to be determined. For what we've been talking about for the last couple of months, it's frustrating to come here. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's frustrating to come on here, and I so badly want to talk about something other than the Penguins losing, from their shoddy goaltending, from their bad defense, from their lack of depth in their bottom six. All of these conversations go back to the ineptitude of the general manager. And that I'm not excited about free agency. I'm not excited about the draft. The only thing that I'm looking forward to, and it's not even a guarantee because we don't know what FSG is thinking, the only thing I'm looking forward to is the termination of Ron Hextall. That's what I want, Robbie. I certainly know that's what you want, and I'm willing to put my life savings on it that that's what the majority of the Penguins fandom wants as well. And so if and when that does happen, obviously we will be here to break down the ramifications of that. Like I said, the Penguins are treading water, for better or for worse, and they could be treading water until the offseason arrives, however short or however long from now that may be. We got through what I wanted to talk about. If you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up this edition of the Penscast, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to, like, you were talking about the playoffs being the most important part and stuff like that. Like, if you've been a fan since whenever you became a fan, whenever that was exactly for anybody, I've been basically a fan since I was born. I was born in, not to age myself too much, I was born in September of 89, so right before the Penguins started that 89-90 season. So I just did some quick math. Like, this is my 33rd year as a Penguins fan. In the 32 previous years, I've seen the Penguins play playoff hockey 27 times. They've missed the playoffs exactly 5 times.
That is ridiculous.
Since I've been alive. And the first one was actually the year I was born, in 89-90. They followed up with 2 straight cups after that, and they made the playoffs every year until 2002. And then they missed 4 years in a row, and they haven't missed since then in 2006. So as of the 32 completed NHL seasons that I've been a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, they've made the playoffs 27 times, and in that time have won 5 Stanley Cups, which is more than any franchise in the NHL. There's been a couple 4-time winners, but nobody has won the Stanley Cup more. And actually, one day I was bored and I went through. I know for a fact nobody's made the playoffs more in that time frame. Nobody's won more Stanley Cups. So, yeah, this would be, I mean, for me, I was a sophomore in high school, not college, sorry, sophomore in high school, the last time the Penguins didn't make the playoffs. So, hopefully we don't revisit this in 3 weeks when we talk about what was of the Penguins playoff streak. But to me, just making the playoffs is a big deal because I've seen so much. But maybe the full shakeup needs them missing the playoffs. I don't know. I don't really want to say that, but it's clear that there are very deep-seated issues with this team, and nothing is going to get fixed unless serious changes are made, starting in the front office. And I agree with what Josh Yohe said, where there's definitely some deployment questions with what Mike Sullivan's done this year, but he's just playing the hand that he was dealt, and it's been a complete and abject failure on the part of Ron Hextall, and I foresee nothing changing with the success on the ice until something changes with the people running the show. So, yeah, we'll see what happens in these next 3 weeks. By the time this episode comes out on Friday, there will already be a much clearer picture of whatever happens tonight. I know the Penguins play on Thursday night along with at least the Florida Panthers as well. So we'll have a good understanding of where things sit on Friday when you listen to this. Yeah, that's all I really got for this week. Who knows what we'll talk about next week? Hopefully it's a little cheerier episode, but with this team, I guess you just never know.
You brought up a good point there as we start to conclude and wind down this episode. I didn't want to say it as well. I did not want to say that it would be in the Penguins' best interest to miss the playoffs and get a lottery pick, because it wouldn't. And that's not what you and I are accustomed to, or probably anyone else listening to this podcast is accustomed to, is them getting a lottery pick of all things. So, like you said, between now and when we record the next episode, the Penguins will play the Predators, the Bruins, and Flyers on a back-to-back this upcoming weekend. April 4th, they'll play the New Jersey Devils, and Thursday, April 6th, when we record the next episode, they will battle the Minnesota Wild. And like you said, we will probably have a much more clearer picture at the end of tonight, the end of March 30th, as it relates to the Penguins and their ever-elusive chase for a Stanley Cup playoff berth. But like Robbie said, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't want these podcast episodes to be largely negative. I want to talk about hypothetical first round matchups. I want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the Penguins' potential first round opponents. I want to talk about what the Penguins might be able to do if they were to go on a magical run and prove me wrong and go deep into the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. I want to be having those conversations. And the fact that I'm not at this point in the season is frustrating for me. And I'm sure it's not only frustrating for me, frustrating for just about every Penguin fan out there who is so used to this team being better than what they are. And it's not on the players. The players are only doing what they can. It's on the ineptitude of the front office for the roster that they and largely Ron Hextall has constructed. Next Tuesday will be when the mailbag episode goes out, and then we will be back later in the week for the traditional news episode of the Penscast. If you're not following us on social media, well, if you like what you're listening to, hey, why don't you give us a follow on Twitter? Follow the Skating Penguin Network on Twitter at PenguinsFFSN, and follow Fans First Sports Network as well at Fans First SN as we continue to try and grow both of these brand new brands. And we'll see how much more traction we can get as a newly independent Pittsburgh Penguins podcast. Until then, I have been Garrett Bahana for Robbie Noggle. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to all of you again this time next week.